The sound of coffee shattering against marble echoed through the Wellington mansion like a gunshot. Rebecca stared at the brown liquid dripping down their custom white cabinets, each drop marking the end of something she couldn't yet name. "That's what happens when you lie to me, Rebecca." The voice belonged to Marcus Wellington, though she barely recognized it anymore. Her husband of 20 years stood in their kitchen, his face twisted with rage she'd never seen before. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his silver hair disheveled, so different from the composed millionaire ex-husband she would later describe to lawyers. "Marcus, please," Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible in the sudden silence. "We can talk about this calmly." "Calm." His laugh was sharp, dangerous. "You want calm after what you've done." But what had she done? 3 days earlier, Rebecca had simply been looking for tax documents in Marcus's home office. She'd needed their charitable contribution receipts for their accountant, a mundane task that had become anything but mundane when she opened his private filing cabinet. The leather chair had creaked as she rifled through folders marked with names she didn't recognize. Meridian Holdings, Sunset Investments, Caribbean Trust Fund. Each folder contained bank statements showing transfers that made her stomach drop. $50,000 here, $75,000 there, all from their joint accounts to places she'd never heard of. What in the world, she'd whispered to the empty office, staring at numbers that didn't make sense. Marcus earned good money as a tech company CEO, but these weren't business expenses. These were personal transfers to offshore accounts. Her phone had buzzed with a text from Marcus, "Working late again. Don't wait up," but she'd known he wasn't at the office. Last Tuesday, she'd called his secretary asking when he'd be home for dinner. The woman had sounded confused. "Mrs. Wellington, Mr. Wellington left at 3 in the afternoon." Rebecca had hung up without explanation, a cold certainty settling in her chest. Her husband was lying about where he spent his evenings, and now she knew he was lying about their money too. Standing in their kitchen now, watching coffee drip onto the floor, Rebecca realized how naive she'd been. She'd confronted Marcus expecting confusion, maybe embarrassment. Instead, she'd unleashed something violent and frightening. "Marcus, I found some papers yesterday," she'd said that morning, her voice shaking as she poured his usual coffee. Black, 2 sugars, served in the blue ceramic mug she'd bought him for their anniversary. Papers. He hadn't looked up from his phone, scrolling through emails with the focused intensity that made him successful in business and distant at home. "Bank statements. Large transfers. I don't understand." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. The coffee maker finished brewing with a final hiss, the only sound in their cavernous kitchen. "Rebecca, you're imagining things." His tone was dismissive, the same voice he used with employees who questioned his decisions. $50,000 to Meridian Holdings, $75,000 to Sunset Investments. "Marcus, these are our retirement accounts being drained." That's when the coffee cup had flown past her head. Now, as Marcus stormed toward the garage, Rebecca touched her temple where his laptop had struck her moments later. Her fingers came away bloody. 20 years of marriage, and she'd never seen him violent. She'd married a man who brought her flowers every Friday, who opened car doors and pulled out chairs. When had that man become someone who threw things at her head? The kitchen door slammed, followed by the roar of Marcus's BMW speeding down their circular driveway. Rebecca sank to the floor, sitting among the coffee-stained broken ceramic, and finally let herself cry. She was 52 years old, a former teacher who'd given up her career to support Marcus's ambitions. She had no income of her own, no savings account he didn't control, no life that existed independently of being Mrs. Marcus Wellington. For 20 years, she'd been half of a perfect couple, attending charity galas and country club events, smiling beside her successful husband. Now she was alone on a kitchen floor, bleeding and afraid, realizing that perfection had always been an illusion. Her phone rang. Patricia Hayes, her closest friend since college. "Honey child, you sound terrible," Patricia said when Rebecca answered. Patricia Hayes had become a successful therapist, maintaining her warm Southern accent despite decades in New England. "What's wrong?" "I think my marriage is over," Rebecca whispered. "What happened?" Rebecca looked around their kitchen, the marble countertops Marcus had insisted on, the commercial-grade appliances they'd never needed, the breakfast nook where they'd eaten in silence for months. All of it felt like a stage set for a play she no longer wanted to perform. "I've been thinking," Rebecca said, using the phrase that always preceded her most difficult revelations. "I don't know who I am anymore. Patricia, I don't know when I became someone who needed permission to check our own bank accounts." This was the moment sitting on her kitchen floor at 52 when Rebecca Wellington began to understand that some chapters of life end not with celebration, but with the sound of breaking glass and the decision to finally stop cleaning up someone else's mess. The bleeding had stopped, but something else had started. For the first time in years, Rebecca was angry, and anger, she was about to discover, could be the beginning of everything. The emergency room smelled like disinfectant and desperation. Rebecca sat on the examination table, holding an ice pack to her temple while Dr. Sarah Collins examined the gash Marcus's laptop had left. "Mrs. Wellington, this needs stitches," Dr. Collins said gently. "Can you tell me how this happened?" Rebecca had practiced the lie during the 20-minute drive to the hospital. "I slipped in the kitchen, hit my head on the counter." Dr. Collins paused, her pen hovering over the chart. The laceration pattern suggests impact from a flat object with corners, like a book or a laptop. "I'm very clumsy. Mrs. Wellington, I'm required to ask, do you feel safe at home?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Rebecca stared at her hands, noting how pale they looked under the harsh of fluorescent lights. When had she become so fragile in her teaching days? She'd been strong, confident, capable of managing 30 teenagers with authority and warmth. Now she couldn't even manage her own husband. "Yes," she lied. "I feel safe." But as Dr. Collins numbed her temple and began stitching, Rebecca's mind raced. She thought about the folders in Marcus's office, the bank statements showing systematic theft from their marriage. She thought about his phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room, his weekend business trips that never involved any business she could identify. Most of all, she thought about his face when he'd thrown that coffee cup. For just a moment, she'd seen something she'd never seen before, a man who genuinely wanted to hurt her. "There," Dr. Collins said, finishing the stitches. "Keep this dry for 48 hours. And Mrs. Wellington, if you ever need to talk to someone, we have social workers here who specialize in—" "I'm fine," Rebecca interrupted. "Thank you for your help." But she wasn't fine. As she drove home through the tree-lined streets of their affluent neighborhood, Rebecca realized she was afraid, not just of Marcus's anger, but of her own helplessness. She'd spent 2 decades building a life that depended entirely on someone else's goodwill. What happened when that goodwill disappeared? Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Sorry about this morning. Stressful time at work. Order dinner from Giovanni's tonight." No apology for the violence. No acknowledgement that he'd sent his wife to the hospital. Just instructions about dinner, as if she were his assistant rather than his partner. Rebecca pulled into their driveway and sat in her car, staring at the house they'd built together. 8 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, a 3-car garage, and a pool they never used. Marcus called it their dream home. Rebecca now wondered whose dream it had been. Inside, she found their housekeeper, Maria, cleaning coffee stains from the kitchen floor. "Mrs. Wellington, are you all right?" Maria asked, noticing the bandage on Rebecca's temple. "I'm fine, Maria. Just a small accident." Maria nodded, but her expression suggested she didn't believe it either. How many people in Rebecca's life could see what she was finally beginning to admit to herself? Rebecca climbed the stairs to their master bedroom and sat at her vanity, studying her reflection, 52 years old, with laugh lines around her eyes and gray threading through her brown hair. She'd been pretty once, she thought, not stunning like the young women who worked at Marcus's company, but pleasant enough. Marcus used to say she had kind eyes. When was the last time he'd complimented her? When was the last time he'd looked at her with anything other than mild irritation or complete indifference? Her laptop sat on the vanity, and for the first time in years, Rebecca opened it with purpose. She Googled "divorce lawyers Massachusetts" and stared at the results. The idea felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Then she searched "signs of financial abuse," and felt her stomach drop as she recognized herself in every article. The controlled access to money, the secrecy about finances, the punishment for asking questions. Her phone rang again. This time it was Ashley Parker, Marcus's assistant. "Mrs. Wellington, this is Ashley from Mr. Wellington's office. He asked me to confirm your dinner reservation at Giovanni's for 7 o'clock. Rebecca had never made a dinner reservation. "Ashley, did my husband make this reservation?" "Yes, ma'am. He said you'd both be there tonight to discuss some important business matters." "What business matters?" A pause. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wellington. I assumed you knew." After hanging up, Rebecca sat perfectly still. Marcus was setting up a public meeting, probably to discuss their misunderstanding in a place where she wouldn't cause a scene. He was managing her the way he managed everything else in his life, with control and calculation. For 20 years, she'd played along with this management. She'd been the perfect wife, never questioning, never demanding, never insisting on her own needs or desires. She'd thought this made her a good partner. Now she realized it had made her a victim. Rebecca walked to her closet and pulled out a black dress, one she'd bought for charity events, but rarely wore because Marcus preferred her in blue. Tonight, she decided, she would wear exactly what she wanted. As she dressed, Rebecca made a decision that would change everything. She wouldn't meet Marcus at Giovanni's to be managed or controlled or manipulated into accepting his version of reality. Instead, she would finally do something she should have done years ago. She would get help. Patricia answered on the first ring. "Honey child, how are you feeling?" "Patricia, I need the name of a good divorce lawyer." "Oh, Rebecca. Are you sure? For the first time in 20 years, I'm absolutely sure about something. I know just the person, Michael Thompson. He's expensive, but he's the best in the state for complex financial cases." "Complex financial? Honey, when rich men get divorced, they always try to hide money. Michael finds it." Rebecca wrote down the number with hands that no longer shook. For the first time since discovering those bank statements, she felt something besides fear. She felt powerful. The law office of Michael Thompson occupied the top floor of a downtown Boston high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the harbor. Rebecca sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, clutching a folder filled with copies of Marcus's bank statements. Michael Thompson was younger than she'd expected, maybe 45, with graying temples and sharp blue eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. He spoke with the precision of someone who charged $800 an hour and was worth every penny. "Mrs. Wellington, let me be very clear about what we're dealing with here," Michael said, spreading the bank statements across his mahogany desk. "Your husband has been systematically moving marital assets to offshore accounts for at least 2 years. In Massachusetts, this is considered financial fraud in a divorce proceeding." "How much?" Rebecca asked. "Based on these statements alone, approximately $3.2 million. The number hit Rebecca like another laptop to the head. $3 million. Marcus had stolen $3 million from their marriage and hidden it from her. "But that's not all," Michael continued. "Mrs. Wellington, are you aware that your husband has been having an affair?" Rebecca's breath caught. "I suspected, but Ashley Parker, she's been his assistant for 3 years, and his mistress for 2. She's currently 6 months pregnant." The room seemed to spin. Rebecca gripped the arms of her chair, fighting nausea. "Pregnant?" "Yes, and according to my sources, your husband has been telling people that he plans to divorce you and marry Miss Parker as soon as their child is born." Rebecca stared out the window at the harbor, watching sailboats move across the gray water. Such a peaceful scene, while her life imploded in a lawyer's office 40 floors above the city. "Mrs. Wellington." Michael's voice was gentle now. "I know this is a lot to process." 20 years, Rebecca whispered. "I gave him 20 years of my life. I gave up my career, my friends, my independence. For what? So he could steal our money and start a new family with someone young enough to be our daughter. Mrs. Wellington, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Has your husband ever been physically violent with you?" Rebecca touched the bandage on her temple. "Yesterday was the first time he hit you, or the first time he left a mark?" The question made Rebecca think. How many times had Marcus grabbed her arm too tightly during arguments? How many times had he accidentally bumped into her when he was angry? How many times had she made excuses for bruises she couldn't quite explain? I don't know, she admitted. Michael nodded grimly. Mrs. Wellington, your husband is what we call a coercive controller. He's been using financial abuse and emotional manipulation to control you for years. The physical violence is an escalation, not an anomaly. What does that mean for the divorce? It means we're going to take him for everything he's worth. And I mean everything. For the first time in days, Rebecca smiled. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Michael explained Massachusetts divorce law, community property rights, and the penalties for hiding assets during divorce proceedings. He outlined a strategy that would freeze Marcus's offshore accounts, expose his affair, and protect Rebecca from further violence. I'll need a retainer of $50,000 to begin, Michael said as they concluded. Rebecca's heart sank. I don't have access to that much money. Marcus controls all our accounts. Mrs. Wellington, you're entitled to half of everything in those accounts. I can file an emergency motion to give you immediate access to marital funds. In fact, given the evidence of financial abuse, I expect the court will be very sympathetic. As Rebecca left the law office, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not the quiet, desperate hope she'd clung to during bad times in her marriage, but real, actionable hope based on legal rights and financial entitlements. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the black BMW parked across from the building. Marcus sat behind the wheel, watching the entrance with the intensity of a predator. Their eyes met through the windshield, and Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. How had he known where she was? Had he followed her? Or was he having her watch? Marcus rolled down his window and gestured for her to approach the car. Rebecca hesitated, then decided she was done being afraid. She walked to the passenger side and got in. Interesting place for a shopping trip, Marcus said. His voice was calm, conversational, but Rebecca could see the tension in his jaw. I wasn't shopping. No, I don't imagine you were. Rebecca, we need to talk. We tried talking yesterday. You sent me to the hospital. Marcus's facade slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating. That was an accident. You surprised me with those accusations. Accusations, Marcus. I saw the bank statements. $3 million moved to accounts I've never heard of. That's not an accusation. It's evidence. Evidence of what smart financial planning tax strategies, Rebecca. You don't understand business. You never have. The condescension in his voice was like a slap. For 20 years, Marcus had dismissed her intelligence, her opinions, her right to participate in decisions that affected her life. She'd accepted it as the price of being married to a successful man. I understand theft, Rebecca said quietly. And I understand lies. Marcus's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging into her skin. Listen to me very carefully. Rebecca, you're going to stop this foolishness. You're going to fire whatever lawyer you just hired, and you're going to come home and be a good wife. Or what? His grip tightened. Or you'll discover that divorce can be a very expensive and very public process. I have friends, Rebecca, judges, prosecutors, police commissioners. You're a middle-aged woman with no income and no prospects. I'm a respected businessman with connections throughout this city. Who do you think people will believe? Rebecca looked down at his hand on her wrist, seeing the white marks his fingers were leaving on her skin. This was who Marcus really was, not the charming man who donated to charity and served on hospital boards, but a man who threatened his wife in a lawyer's parking lot. Let go of me, she said. Not until you promise to stop this nonsense. Marcus, let go of me, or I'll scream until someone calls the police. He released her wrist and sat back, his expression shifting back to false concern. Rebecca, you're being irrational. The stress of yesterday has you confused. Come home and we'll discuss this calmly. Rebecca opened the car door. I am home. Marcus, for the first time in 20 years, I'm exactly where I belong. She got out of the car and walked away, her heart pounding but her steps steady. Behind her, she heard Marcus start the engine and drive away, his tires squealing against the pavement. As Rebecca walked to her own car, she realized something important. She wasn't afraid anymore. Angry, Yeah, hurt, devastated, betrayed absolutely, but not afraid. Fear, she was learning, was a luxury she could no longer afford. Detective Maria Johnson had the gravelly voice of someone who'd spent 20 years listening to lies and half-truths. She sat across from Rebecca in the Victim Services office at Boston General Hospital, her weathered hands folded on a manila folder that contained Rebecca's medical records. Mrs. Wellington, your neighbor called in a domestic disturbance yesterday morning, Detective Johnson said, speaking slowly and clearly. She heard shouting, then glass breaking, then a car speeding away. When officers arrived at your house, they found blood in the kitchen and evidence of violence. Rebecca touched the stitches at her temple. It was an accident. Ma'am, the blood spatter patterns suggest otherwise. Someone threw an object at you with considerable force. I provoked him. I questioned his business dealings. Detective Johnson leaned forward, her expression patient but firm. Mrs. Wellington, there is no behavior that justifies domestic violence. None. Can you tell me about these business dealings? Rebecca hesitated. Michael Thompson had advised her to cooperate with the police, but she still felt disloyal discussing Marcus's private affairs with a stranger. My husband has been moving money to offshore accounts without my knowledge. When I confronted him about it, he became violent. How much money are we talking about? Over $3 million. Detective Johnson's eyebrows rose slightly. Mrs. Wellington, that's not just marital misconduct. That could be embezzlement, tax evasion, or money laundering. Has your husband ever mentioned feeling pressure at work? Any business problems or legal troubles? Marcus owns his company, Wellington Technologies. He's always been very successful. Successful people sometimes get desperate when their success is threatened. Mrs. Wellington, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Do you believe your husband might try to hurt you again? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Rebecca thought about Marcus's grip on her wrist in the parking lot, the cold calculation in his eyes when he threatened her. Yes, she said quietly. I think he might. Detective Johnson opened her folder and pulled out a photograph. Mrs. Wellington, do you recognize this woman? Rebecca stared at the picture of a young blonde woman with bright blue eyes and a radiant smile, pretty in the way that made older women feel invisible. No, I don't think so. This is Ashley Parker. She works as your husband's personal assistant. She's also 6 months pregnant with his child. The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Seeing the woman's face made the affair real in a way that legal documents couldn't. How do you know this? Miss Parker came forward yesterday afternoon. She's been having second thoughts about her relationship with your husband, especially after learning about the violence against you. Detective Johnson pulled out another document. Miss Parker provided us with these recordings of conversations with your husband over the past 2 months. In them, he discusses his plans to divorce you, marry her, and ensure that you receive minimal assets in the settlement. Rebecca stared at the transcript Detective Johnson handed her. Marcus's words, captured in black and white, revealed a level of calculation that took her breath away. He's been planning this for months, Rebecca whispered. It gets worse. Mrs. Wellington, in the most recent recording, made 3 days ago, your husband discusses making sure you don't cause problems during the divorce proceedings. The exact quote is, Rebecca won't be an issue much longer. What does that mean? We're not sure. But combined with the violence and the financial crimes, we have enough evidence to obtain a restraining order and freeze his assets while we investigate. Rebecca felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. Relief that someone finally believed her, that Marcus's crimes were being taken seriously. Terror about what he might do when he realized his carefully constructed life was falling apart. Detective Johnson, what happens now? Now we build a case. Financial crimes, domestic violence, possibly conspiracy. Your husband has made some very serious mistakes. Mrs. Wellington, rich men always think they're too smart to get caught. That afternoon, Rebecca met with Dr. Patricia Hayes at a small coffee shop near the hospital. Patricia listened to the morning's revelations with growing anger. Honey child, I've been worried about you for years, Patricia said, stirring her latte with unnecessary force. Marcus has been isolating you, controlling you, diminishing you. I've watched my best friend disappear into a marriage that was slowly killing her spirit. Why didn't you say something? I tried. Remember 2 years ago when I suggested you go back to teaching? You said Marcus thought it wasn't necessary, that your job was to support his career. Rebecca did remember. She'd been excited about returning to education, but Marcus had dismissed the idea so completely that she'd felt foolish for even considering it. I thought he was protecting me from stress, Rebecca said. He was protecting himself from accountability. Rebecca, narcissistic abuse is insidious. It happens so gradually that you don't realize how much of yourself you've lost until someone like Detective Johnson helps you see the truth. Rebecca thought about the phrase, narcissistic abuse. It sounded clinical, almost impersonal, but it described something very personal, the slow erosion of her sense of self over 20 years of marriage. Patricia, do you think I can rebuild my life at 52? Do you think it's too late for me to become independent? Patricia reached across the table and squeezed Rebecca's hand. Honey child, I think 52 is exactly the right age to finally become who you were meant to be. That evening, Rebecca sat alone in her temporary hotel room. Michael Thompson had advised her not to return home until the restraining order was in place and called her sister in California. Jenny, it's Rebecca. Rebecca, how are you? It's been months since we talked. The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult of Rebecca's life, explaining Marcus's crimes, the violence, the financial abuse, the affair. But as she talked, Rebecca realized something important. She wasn't ashamed. For the first time in years, she was telling the truth about her life without editing or softening or making excuses. It felt like shedding a skin she'd been trapped in. Rebecca, you can come stay with me, Jenny offered. Take time to figure things out. Thank you, but I need to stay here and fight. I need to see this through. Are you sure this sounds dangerous? Rebecca looked out her hotel window at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably planning his next move, calculating how to minimize the damage to his reputation and his wealth. Jenny, I've spent 20 years being afraid of disappointing Marcus, afraid of not being good enough for him, afraid of life without him. I'm done being afraid. The only thing I'm afraid of now is not fighting hard enough for the life I deserve. As she hung up the phone, Rebecca realized this was true. The woman who had discovered those bank statements a week ago was gone. In her place was someone stronger, angrier, and determined to reclaim everything that had been stolen from her. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. The courthouse steps were crowded with lawyers, plaintiffs, and reporters covering various trials. Rebecca climbed them slowly, still adjusting to the walker she'd been using since her concussion. Physical therapy was helping, but her balance remained unsteady, another reminder of Marcus's violence. She'd come for the preliminary hearing on the restraining order, but as she entered the building, she spotted two familiar figures in the visitors' lounge. Marcus sat beside Ashley Parker, their heads bent together in urgent conversation. Rebecca ducked behind a pillar, her heart racing. She should walk away, should follow her lawyer's advice to avoid any contact with Marcus. Instead, she found herself pressing against the marble column, straining to hear their words. She's going to ruin everything. Marcus. Ashley's voice was high and stressed, nothing like the professional tone Rebecca remembered from phone calls. Rebecca doesn't have the spine to fight me, Marcus replied. His voice carried the casual confidence that had once made Rebecca feel safe and now made her feel sick. But what if she does? What if she finds out about the Cayman accounts? The Switzerland deposits Marcus. There's more money hidden than she even knows about. Rebecca's blood turned to ice. More accounts. How much had Marcus stolen from their marriage? Then we'll make sure she doesn't live to tell anyone. The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp, her whole body trembling. Marcus, you can't be serious. Ashley's voice shook now. I've worked too hard to let some mousy housewife destroy my future. Our future. Ashley, think about the baby. Think about the life we're building together. What about Rebecca? Rebecca was never supposed to be permanent. She was useful for a while, good connections, respectable family, the perfect corporate wife, but she's outlived her usefulness. Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face. 20 years reduced to usefulness. 20 years of love, loyalty, and sacrifice dismissed as a business arrangement. The baby will inherit everything once Rebecca is out of the picture. Marcus continued. A tragic accident, a suicide brought on by the stress of divorce. These things happen to unstable middle-aged women all the time. Marcus, I can't be part of killing someone. You won't be part of it. You'll be the grieving mistress who tried to convince me to reconcile with my troubled wife. Very sympathetic, very believable. Rebecca realized she was witnessing something beyond adultery or financial crime. Marcus was planning her murder, discussing it as casually as he might plan a business merger. She needed to get away, needed to call Detective Johnson, needed to document this conversation somehow. But as she tried to back away from the pillar, her walker caught on the marble base with a loud scraping sound. The conversation stopped immediately. "What was that?" Ashley asked. Rebecca heard footsteps approaching. She hobbled as quickly as she could toward the elevators, praying she could escape before Marcus saw her. "Rebecca." She froze. Marcus's voice behind her was pleasant, concerned the same tone he'd used when introducing her to clients at dinner parties. "What a surprise to see you here. Ashley and I were just discussing some business matters." Rebecca turned slowly, gripping her walker for support. Marcus stood 5 feet away, impeccably dressed in his charcoal gray suit, his expression perfectly composed. Ashley hung back, her face pale and frightened. "Business matters," Rebecca repeated, her voice somehow steady despite her terror. "Legal issues related to the company. Nothing that would interest you." His smile was warm, but his eyes were cold as winter. "How are you feeling?" "You look much better." "I'm fine, thank you." "Good." "Rebecca, I hope you're not letting this temporary misunderstanding between us interfere with your judgment. Divorce proceedings can be very stressful. Sometimes people make decisions they later regret." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Rebecca understood that Marcus knew she'd overheard their conversation, and he was warning her to stay silent. "I should go," Rebecca said. "I have an appointment." "Of course. Give my regards to Mr. Thompson." The fact that Marcus knew her lawyer's name sent another chill through Rebecca. How much did he know about her movements, her plans, her life? As the elevator doors closed, Rebecca saw Marcus watching her with the same calculated expression he used when analyzing business deals. She was no longer his wife in his mind. She was a problem to be solved. The moment she reached her car, Rebecca called Detective Johnson. "Detective, it's Rebecca Wellington. I need to see you immediately. Marcus just threatened to kill me." "Mrs. Wellington, slow down." What exactly happened? Rebecca recounted the overheard conversation, her hands shaking as she gripped the phone. Detective Johnson listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification. "Mrs. Wellington, you did the right thing by calling me. This changes everything. We're going to need to move quickly to ensure your safety." "What does that mean?" "It means we're going to arrest your husband tonight." 2 hours later, Rebecca sat in Detective Johnson's office, watching through one-way glass as Marcus was led into an interrogation room in handcuffs. Even in custody, he maintained his composure, straightening his tie and sitting with the confident posture of a man accustomed to being in control. "He doesn't look worried," Rebecca observed. "He should be," Detective Johnson replied. "Conspiracy to commit murder is a capital offense in Massachusetts. Add that to the financial crimes and domestic violence, and your husband is looking at life in prison." Rebecca watched Marcus through the glass, remembering the man she'd fallen in love with 30 years ago. He'd been charming then, successful but not yet wealthy, ambitious but not yet ruthless. When had he become someone capable of planning her murder? "Detective Johnson, do you think he would have actually killed me?" "Mrs. Wellington, based on the pattern of escalating control and violence, combined with the financial motivations and his obvious lack of empathy, yes, I think he absolutely would have killed you." The truth of this statement settled over Rebecca like a heavy blanket. She'd been living with a man who saw her as an obstacle to his happiness, an expense to be eliminated. What happens now? Now we prepare for trial. Your husband has expensive lawyers, but we have recordings, financial evidence, and witness testimony. Most importantly, we have Ashley Parker. She's cooperating. She's terrified. Marcus made the mistake of threatening her too. Apparently, If she'd refused to go along with his plan, she would have been next. Rebecca thought about Ashley Young, pregnant, trapped in a relationship with a man who viewed people as assets to be managed or liabilities to be eliminated. In different circumstances, Rebecca might have hated her. Instead, she felt a strange kinship. "Detective, I want to help with the prosecution. I want to testify, provide evidence, whatever it takes to make sure he never hurts anyone again. Mrs. Wellington, testifying against your husband in a murder conspiracy trial will be difficult. His lawyers will attack your credibility, your mental state, your motivations. Are you prepared for that?" Rebecca thought about the question seriously. A year ago, the idea of public testimony would have terrified her. She'd spent decades avoiding conflict, smoothing over problems, keeping family secrets private. "Detective Johnson, for 20 years I've been protecting Marcus's reputation at the expense of my own truth. I'm done with that. If standing up in court and telling the world what kind of man he really is will protect other women from going through what I've experienced, then yes, I'm absolutely prepared." As she left the police station that evening, Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in decades: complete clarity about who she was and what she needed to do. Marcus had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the woman he'd spent 20 years diminishing. The mousy housewife he'd dismissed so contemptuously was about to show him exactly what she was capable of. The war room at Michael Thompson's law firm looked like the headquarters of a major criminal investigation. Charts covered every wall, showing the flow of money from Marcus's company to dozens of offshore accounts. Photographs documented Rebecca's injuries. Recorded conversations were transcribed and highlighted, and financial records created a paper trail of systematic theft spanning 5 years. "Mrs. Wellington, your husband has been far busier than we initially realized," Michael said, gesturing to a chart that looked like a spider web of financial connections. "We've identified 17 separate offshore accounts, 12 shell corporations, and at least $6 million in hidden assets." Rebecca stared at the numbers, still struggling to comprehend the scale of Marcus's deception. $6 million. How is that possible? Your husband has been skimming from his own company for years, inflated consulting fees to companies he secretly owns, phantom employees whose paychecks go to his accounts, contract kickbacks routed through Caribbean banks. It's actually quite sophisticated. But where did the money come from originally? Michael's expression grew grim. "Mrs. Wellington, your husband's company has been receiving government contracts for cybersecurity work. Some of that money was supposed to fund domestic violence prevention programs for federal employees." The irony was so bitter, Rebecca actually laughed. He stole money meant to help abused women while planning to murder his own wife. The federal prosecutors are very interested in that aspect. This isn't just a divorce case anymore. Rebecca, this is a federal criminal investigation involving government fraud, money laundering, domestic violence, and conspiracy to commit murder. Dr. Patricia Hayes knocked on the conference room door, carrying a tray of coffee and sandwiches. Over the past week, she'd become Rebecca's unofficial support system, attending meetings and helping her navigate the overwhelming legal process. "Honey child, you need to eat something," Patricia said, setting a sandwich in front of Rebecca. "You're going to faint if you don't start taking care of yourself." Shuffled, Rebecca realized she'd lost almost 15 pounds since discovering Marcus's crimes. The stress had eliminated her appetite, but Patricia was right. She needed to maintain her strength for the battles ahead. "Patricia, can I ask you something as a therapist?" Rebecca said. "How does someone live with a person for 20 years without seeing who they really are?" Patricia sat down beside her, her expression thoughtful. "Rebecca, narcissistic abuse is designed to be invisible. Abusers like Marcus are experts at presenting different faces to different people. The man you married probably wasn't entirely fake. He was just one facet of a complex, manipulative personality. But the signs must have been there. They were subtle at first, then gradually more obvious. The way he isolated you from friends and family, the way he controlled your access to money, the way he dismissed your opinions and made you doubt your own perceptions. Rebecca, you've been living in a psychological prison for years. The fact that you finally broke free shows incredible strength." Michael cleared his throat. "Ladies, I hate to interrupt, but we have a development. Ashley Parker wants to meet with Rebecca." Rebecca's stomach clenched. Why? She says she has information about Marcus's plans that she didn't share with the police. Information that could help protect you. 2 hours later, Rebecca sat across from Ashley Parker in a private room at the prosecutor's office. Ashley looked exhausted, her pregnancy obvious now under a loose sweater. Her hands shook as she sipped herbal tea. Mrs. Wellington, I don't know how to apologize for what I've done to your life, Ashley began, her voice barely above a whisper. You can start by telling me the truth, Rebecca replied. Ashley took a shaky breath. Marcus told me you were getting divorced anyway. He said you were unhappy, that you'd agreed to a quiet separation. He made it sound like I was helping him through a difficult time, not destroying a marriage. And you believed that. I wanted to believe it. Mrs. Wellington, I was 26 when I started working for him. I'd never had a boss pay attention to me before. Never felt important or valued. When Marcus started showing interest in me, it felt like a fairy tale. Rebecca studied Ashley's face, seeing exhaustion and genuine remorse. When did you realize it wasn't a fairy tale? About 3 months ago, when he started talking about making sure you didn't cause problems during the divorce. The way he talked about you changed. It wasn't sad or regretful anymore. It was angry, calculating. Ashley, the police said you have information that could help me. What is it? Ashley reached into her purse and pulled out a small digital recorder. I've been recording our conversations for weeks. Marcus doesn't know. I was afraid he might try to blame everything on me when things went wrong. She pressed play, and Marcus's voice filled the room. Ashley, you need to understand something. Rebecca is not going to just disappear quietly. She's going to fight, and when she fights, she's going to discover things that could destroy us both. What kind of things? The federal contracts, the money trail. If Rebecca's lawyers start digging into the company finances, they're going to find connections to some very powerful people who don't want their names associated with scandal. Rebecca leaned forward. What does that mean? Ashley stopped the recording. Marcus has been laundering money for other people. Politicians, judges, business leaders, people who have as much to lose as he does if the truth comes out. Which means Marcus isn't the only person who wants you to disappear. Mrs. Wellington, he has partners who are just as invested in keeping you quiet. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Rebecca had thought she was fighting one man's greed and violence. Instead, she was up against a conspiracy involving some of the most powerful people in Massachusetts. Ashley, why are you telling me this? Because I'm scared. Mrs. Wellington, Marcus promised me a fairy tale life, but now I realize I'm just another loose end to be tied up. If he's willing to kill you to protect his secrets, what makes me think I'm safe? That evening, Rebecca sat in her hotel room under police protection, processing everything she'd learned. Her phone rang Michael Thompson with an update. Rebecca, the federal prosecutors want to offer you a deal. Full immunity from any potential charges related to Marcus's business dealings, complete financial protection, and witness protection if necessary. In exchange, you testify in the federal case against Marcus and his co-conspirators. What does that mean for my divorce settlement? It means you'll get everything. Rebecca, the house, the company, all the hidden assets we can recover. The federal government is very motivated to make sure you feel safe and secure. Cooperative witnesses in corruption cases need to be well taken care of. Rebecca thought about Ashley's recordings, about the web of corruption Marcus had built, about the danger she faced from people whose names she didn't even know. Michael, if I agree to this, how long before it's over? The trial could take 6 months to a year. But Rebecca, this is bigger than your divorce now. This is about bringing down a network of corrupt officials who've been stealing taxpayer money for years. You're not just fighting for your own future anymore. You're fighting for justice. Rebecca looked out her hotel window at the city lights below. Somewhere out there were other women like her. Women married to powerful men who thought they were above the law. Women who'd been diminished and controlled and threatened into silence. Michael, I'll do it. Whatever it takes to make sure no other woman goes through what I've experienced. Rebecca, are you sure this won't be easy? Marcus's lawyers will try to destroy your credibility. They'll dig into every aspect of your life, looking for anything they can use against you. Let them try, Rebecca said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. I've spent 20 years being afraid of Marcus's disapproval. I'm not about to start being afraid of his lawyers." As she hung up the phone, Rebecca realized something profound had shifted in her understanding of herself. 6 months ago, she'd been a woman who needed permission to check her own bank accounts. Now she was preparing to testify against powerful criminals in federal court. The transformation felt both gradual and sudden, like waking up from a dream she hadn't realized she was having. The woman who would take the stand against Marcus Wellington barely resembled the woman who'd discovered those bank statements in his office. That woman had been afraid of conflict, desperate for approval, willing to sacrifice her own needs for the illusion of harmony. This woman was ready for war. The glass towers of Wellington Technologies rose 40 stories above downtown Boston, a monument to Marcus's success and ambition. Rebecca had been to the building countless times for company parties and charity events, always as Marcus's accompanying wife, smiling and nodding while he networked with clients and competitors. Today, she walked through the marble lobby as herself, Rebecca Hayes, soon to be divorced, soon to be financially independent, and absolutely determined to confront her husband on his own territory. The security guard recognized her immediately. "Mrs. Wellington, good morning. Should I call up to Mr. Wellington's office?" "That won't be necessary, James. I'll surprise him." The elevator ride to the executive floor gave Rebecca time to review the documents in her briefcase. Bank statements showing the stolen money, photographs documenting her injuries, transcripts of Ashley's recordings, audio files of Marcus planning her murder. 6 months ago, the idea of confronting Marcus in public would have terrified her. Now, it felt like the natural conclusion to her transformation from victim to survivor. The executive floor hummed with activity. Young assistants hurried between offices. Phones rang constantly, and the air vibrated with the energy of a successful company. Rebecca walked through it all with the calm confidence of someone who owned 50% of everything in sight. Marcus emerged from the conference room with 3 men in expensive suits, the company's board of directors. He saw Rebecca immediately, and his face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, and finally, forced civility. "Rebecca, what a pleasant surprise. Gentlemen, you remember my wife." "Confirm." The board members nodded politely, but Rebecca could see the questions in their eyes. Word of Marcus's arrest had leaked to the business community, and everyone was wondering how much the scandal would affect the company's government contracts. "Marcus, we need to talk," Rebecca said, her voice carrying clearly across the busy office floor. "Of course, darling. Let's go to my office." "No, Marcus, I think we should talk here, in front of your employees, in front of your board, in front of everyone who's believed your lies for years." The office gradually fell silent as people stopped working to listen. Marcus's assistant Ashley's replacement looked terrified as she realized she was witnessing a very public family crisis. "Rebecca, you're embarrassing yourself," Marcus said, his voice still controlled, but his eyes flashing with anger. Am I finally telling the truth?" Rebecca opened her briefcase and pulled out the bank statements. She held them up high enough for everyone to see. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to share some information about your CEO. For the past 5 years, Marcus Wellington has been systematically stealing from this company and from our marriage." Gasps echoed through the office. Phone cameras started appearing as employees realized they were witnessing something newsworthy. "Rebecca, stop this immediately," Marcus said, stepping toward her. "You're having a breakdown?" "No, Marcus, I'm having a breakthrough." Rebecca's voice grew stronger, carrying the authority she'd once used to manage 30 teenagers in her classroom. $6 million, ladies and gentlemen. That's how much your CEO has stolen from company accounts and hidden in offshore banks." Board member Richard Stevens stepped forward. "Mrs. Wellington, these are very serious accusations." "They're not accusations, Mr. Stevens. They're federal charges. Marcus was arrested last week for embezzlement, money laundering, domestic violence, and conspiracy to commit murder." The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca could see the calculations happening in every face. The realization that their company's reputation was about to be destroyed by its own CEO. Marcus's facade finally cracked. "You stupid bitch," he snarled, lunging toward Rebecca. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you know how many people you're going to hurt with your vindictive lies?" The only lies here are the ones you've been telling for years, Rebecca replied, standing her ground even as Marcus advanced on her. Tell them about Ashley Parker. Marcus, tell them about the baby you're having with your assistant while planning to murder your wife. Marcus, board member Catherine Walsh spoke sharply. Is this true? Marcus spun around, his face red with rage and panic. These are the desperate accusations of a mentally unstable woman who can't accept that her marriage is over. Then explain these, Rebecca said, pulling out the photographs of her injuries. Explain the restraining order. Explain why Detective Maria Johnson of the Boston Police Department is currently building a case against you for domestic violence. The photographs passed from hand to hand among the board members. Rebecca watched their faces change as they saw the evidence of Marcus's violence, the black eye, the stitches, the bruises on her wrists. My God, Marcus, Richard Stevens whispered. What have you done? I've built this company into $100 million enterprise, Marcus shouted. I've made all of you rich, and you're going to believe the lies of some bitter, vindictive woman who's trying to destroy me because I want a divorce. A divorce you're seeking so you can marry your pregnant mistress, Rebecca said calmly. A divorce you were planning to expedite by having me killed. The lobby erupted in shocked murmurs. Several employees were openly recording now, and Rebecca knew this confrontation would be on social media within hours. Detective Johnson appeared at the elevator bank with 2 uniformed officers. She'd been waiting for Rebecca's call, ready to provide backup if Marcus became violent. Marcus Wellington, Detective Johnson announced, her voice carrying across the silent office. You're under arrest for violation of a restraining order and intimidation of a witness. I haven't touched her, Marcus protested as the officers approached with handcuffs. Mr. Wellington, you were ordered to stay at least 100 yards away from Mrs. Wellington. Your current distance is approximately 15 feet. That's a violation. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Marcus's composure finally shattered completely. This is my company. These are my employees. You can't arrest me in my own building. Actually, sir, we can arrest you anywhere you commit a crime, Detective Johnson replied matter-of-factly. Rebecca watched as her husband of 20 years was led away in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled, his perfect hair disheveled, his reputation destroyed in front of everyone who'd respected and feared him. Richard Stevens approached Rebecca as the police escort disappeared into the elevator. Mrs. Wellington, on behalf of the board, I want to apologize, and we had no idea. Mr. Stevens, you need to know that the federal investigation extends beyond Marcus's personal crimes. The FBI is examining all of the company's government contracts. You should probably call your lawyers. Catherine Walsh stepped forward. Mrs. Wellington, what does this mean for the company? For our employees. Rebecca looked around the office at the worried faces of people who'd worked hard to build something they believed in, only to discover their leader had been using their success to cover his crimes. That depends on how quickly you can distance yourselves from Marcus and cooperate with the investigation. This company doesn't have to die because of one man's greed, but it's going to require complete transparency and probably new leadership. As Rebecca left the building, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The public confrontation had been risky. Marcus could have become violent. The board could have closed ranks to protect him. The employees could have blamed her for destroying their workplace. Instead, she'd finally told the truth in front of people who had the power to act on it. The conspiracy of silence that had protected Marcus for years was broken. Her phone buzzed with a text from Michael Thompson. Saw the news coverage. Brilliant strategy. Marcus's credibility is destroyed, and public opinion is completely on your side. This changes everything. Rebecca smiled as she walked to her car, realizing that the woman who'd been afraid to check her own bank account 6 months ago had just brought down a multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy in front of television cameras. The transformation was complete. The victim had become the victor. The federal courthouse in Boston was a fortress of granite and marble, built to intimidate anyone who dared challenge the power of law. Rebecca climbed the steps slowly, not from physical weakness this time, but from the weight of what was about to happen inside. Today, Marcus would face the evidence against him in a preliminary hearing that would determine whether he'd spend the next 20 years in federal prison. Rebecca would testify. Ashley would present her recordings, and the financial evidence would speak for itself. The courtroom was packed with reporters, federal prosecutors, and representatives from the companies Marcus had defrauded. Rebecca spotted several familiar faces from Wellington Technologies, including board members who'd looked shocked and betrayed during her public confrontation weeks earlier. Marcus sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled to a chain around his waist. Gone was the immaculate businessman who'd controlled every aspect of their marriage. In his place sat a man who looked older, smaller, defeated. Federal prosecutor Sarah Chen rose to address Judge William Anderson. Your Honor, the United States will prove that Marcus Wellington orchestrated a sophisticated criminal enterprise involving government fraud, money laundering, domestic violence, and conspiracy to commit murder. Marcus's attorney, David Rothstein, had flown in from New York expensive legal representation that cost more per hour than most people earned in a month. Your Honor, my client is the victim of a vindictive ex-wife who's using the federal court system to wage a personal vendetta. The so-called evidence is either fabricated or taken out of context. Judge Anderson, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, studied both attorneys. Counselors, this is a preliminary hearing to determine whether sufficient evidence exists to proceed to trial. Ms. Chen, call your first witness. The United States calls Rebecca Wellington. Rebecca walked to the witness stand on steady legs, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. After months of fear and uncertainty, this moment felt like a relief. Sarah Chen approached the witness stand with a gentle smile. Mrs. Wellington, please tell the court about your marriage to the defendant. I was married to Marcus Wellington for 20 years. I supported his career by giving up my own profession as a teacher. I trusted him completely with our finances and our future. When did you first discover evidence of financial impropriety? Rebecca described finding the bank statements, the offshore accounts, the systematic theft of millions of dollars from their marriage and his company. Mrs. Wellington, how did your husband react when you confronted him about these irregularities? He became violent. He threw a coffee cup at my head, then struck me with his laptop. I required stitches and was treated for a concussion. Had your husband ever been violent before? Rebecca considered the question carefully. Not overtly, but I realize now that there were many incidents of intimidation, control, and psychological abuse that I'd minimized or ignored. Sarah Chen presented the photographs of Rebecca's injuries, the medical records, and the police reports. The evidence was clinical and devastating. Mrs. Wellington, did there come a time when you learned about your husband's relationship with Ashley Parker? Yes, I discovered that Marcus had been having an affair with his assistant for over 2 years. She was pregnant with his child. How did you learn this information? From Detective Maria Johnson and later from Miss Parker herself. Mrs. Wellington, I'm going to play a recording that was made by Miss Parker. Please listen carefully and tell the court if you recognize the voices. The courtroom fell silent as Ashley's recording filled the air. Marcus's voice was unmistakable as he discussed his plans to divorce Rebecca, marry Ashley, and ensure that Rebecca didn't cause problems. Then we'll make sure she doesn't live to tell anyone, Marcus's voice said clearly. Several people in the courtroom gasped. Rebecca watched Marcus's face as his own words condemned him. He stared straight ahead, showing no emotion. Mrs. Wellington, do you recognize the male voice in this recording? Yes, that's my husband, Marcus Wellington. Sarah Chen continued for another hour, establishing the pattern of financial crime, domestic violence, and escalating threats. When she finished, David Rothstein rose for cross-examination. Mrs. Wellington, isn't it true that you filed for divorce and stand to gain millions of dollars from your husband's conviction? I filed for divorce after discovering his crimes and after he assaulted me. The money he stole belongs to our marriage. I'm simply trying to recover what was taken from me. Isn't it true that you hired a private investigator to spy on your husband? I hired an investigator to learn the truth about our finances after discovering evidence of theft. Rothstein tried for another 30 minutes to discredit Rebecca's testimony, but she remained calm and consistent. Months of therapy with Patricia had prepared her for this moment, the attempt to blame her for Marcus's crimes, to paint her as vindictive rather than victimized. Mrs. Wellington, you claim my client planned to murder you? Isn't it possible you misunderstood a recording made by his pregnant mistress who had her own motivations for damaging my client's reputation? Rebecca looked directly at Marcus for the first time since entering the courtroom. Mr. Rothstein, I lived with your client for 20 years. I know his voice, his manner of speaking, his way of thinking. There was no misunderstanding. Marcus Wellington planned to kill me to protect his criminal enterprise. When Ashley Parker took the stand, she was visibly pregnant and obviously terrified. She testified about Marcus's manipulation, his promises of marriage and financial security, and her growing fear as she realized the scope of his crimes. Miss Parker, why did you decide to record your conversations with the defendant? Because I was afraid, Ashley answered, her voice barely audible. Marcus started talking about making people disappear, about solving problems permanently. I realized I might be the next problem he decided to solve. The financial evidence was presented by FBI forensic accountant Margaret Foster, who'd spent months tracing the flow of stolen money through dozens of accounts and shell corporations. Agent Foster, can you summarize your findings regarding the defendant's financial crimes? We've identified approximately $8.5 million in stolen funds. The defendant systematically diverted money from government contracts meant to fund domestic violence prevention programs, then laundered those funds through offshore accounts he controlled. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the courtroom. Marcus had stolen money meant to help abused women while planning to murder his own wife. When the prosecution rested, David Rothstein called only one witness, a character witness who testified about Marcus's charitable contributions and community involvement. The testimony felt hollow against the mountain of evidence documenting his crimes. Judge Anderson recessed for an hour to consider the evidence. When court reconvened, her decision was swift and decisive. Based on the evidence presented, the court finds probable cause to believe that Marcus Wellington committed the crimes charged. This case will proceed to trial. She set Marcus's bail at $5 million, an amount calculated to ensure he remained in custody given the flight risk posed by his offshore accounts. As the marshals led Marcus away, he turned to look at Rebecca one final time. She expected to see anger or hatred, but instead saw something that looked almost like surprise, as if he couldn't quite believe that the woman he'd controlled for 20 years had found the strength to destroy him. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca stood with her legal team and gave a brief statement to the assembled media. Today represents a victory not just for me, but for every woman who's been told she's imagining abuse, who's been blamed for her husband's crimes, who's been made to feel powerless in her own life. The justice system worked today, and I'm grateful, a reporter called out. Mrs. Wellington, what's next for you? Rebecca smiled, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in months. I'm going back to teaching. I'm going to use my financial independence to help other women escape abusive relationships, and I'm going to live the life I should have been living all along. As she walked down the courthouse steps with Patricia beside her, Rebecca realized that the woman who'd discovered those bank statements 9 months ago was gone forever. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, and absolutely certain about her own worth. The transformation was complete. 6 months later, the federal courthouse was packed again, but this time for Marcus Wellington's sentencing hearing. The jury had deliberated for only 2 hours before finding him guilty on all counts: government fraud, money laundering, domestic violence, conspiracy to commit murder, and racketeering. Rebecca sat in the front row of the gallery, wearing a navy blue suit she'd bought with money from her own bank account, an account Marcus had never controlled, never accessed, never even known about. Beside her sat Ashley Parker, holding her 4-month-old daughter, Emma. The relationship between Rebecca and Ashley had surprised everyone, including themselves. What had started as shared testimony in a criminal case had evolved into an unlikely friendship based on mutual survival and shared understanding of Marcus's manipulation. All right, the bailiff announced as Judge Anderson entered the courtroom for the final time in United States v. Marcus Wellington. Marcus stood at the defendant's table. Having lost 40 pounds during his incarceration, prison had stripped away the last vestiges of the commanding businessman Rebecca had married. In his place stood a man who looked ordinary, diminished, defeated. Judge Anderson reviewed the sentencing guidelines, the victim impact statements, and the recommendations from the probation department. Mr. Wellington, you have been convicted of crimes that strike at the heart of our democratic institutions. You stole money meant to help the most vulnerable members of our society. You abused your position of trust as a government contractor. You terrorized your wife and planned her murder to cover your crimes." She paused, letting the weight of the charges settle in the silent courtroom. "The court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You are ordered to pay full restitution of $8.7 million to the victims of your crimes." Rebecca felt a mixture of relief and sadness as she watched Marcus's reaction. Relief that justice had been served, that he would never again have the power to hurt her or anyone else. Sadness for the man she'd once loved, who had chosen greed and control over everything good in his life. Marcus was led away in shackles, and Rebecca knew it was the last time she would ever see him. That chapter of her life was finally, completely closed. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca gave her final statement to the media. "Today's sentence represents justice not just for me, but for every victim of Marcus Wellington's crimes. I want to thank the FBI, the prosecutors, and everyone who helped bring the truth to light," a reporter asked. "Mrs. Hayes, what advice would you give to other women in abusive relationships?" Rebecca had legally changed her name back to Hayes months earlier, reclaiming the identity she'd surrendered when she married Marcus. "Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't let anyone convince you that you're imagining abuse or that you deserve to be treated badly. And remember, it's never too late to reclaim your life." 3 months later, Rebecca stood in her new classroom at Brookline High School, looking out at 30 eager faces. At 53, she was starting over as a teacher, using her experience to connect with students in ways she never could have before Marcus's trial. "Today we're going to talk about financial literacy," she announced to her senior economics class. "We're going to learn how to protect yourselves from people who might try to control you through money." Sorry. The lesson plan was one she'd developed herself, combining traditional economics with practical knowledge about financial abuse, legal rights, and independence. It was the class she wished someone had taught her 30 years earlier. After school, Rebecca drove to the domestic violence shelter where she volunteered 3 afternoons a week. The Rebecca Hayes Foundation, funded by her divorce settlement, provided emergency grants to women escaping abusive relationships, covering everything from apartment deposits to legal fees to job training. "Mrs. Hayes," called Maria Santos, a young woman Rebecca had been mentoring for 2 months. "I got the job, the accounting position at the law firm." Rebecca smiled, remembering her own journey from financial dependence to independence. "That's wonderful. Maria, how does it feel to know you'll be supporting yourself?" "Scary," Maria admitted, "but also amazing. For the first time in my life, I don't need anyone's permission to make decisions about my future." Rebecca understood exactly what she meant. The freedom to make choices about money, career, relationships, even something as simple as what to have for dinner was something most people took for granted. For women emerging from controlling relationships, it felt revolutionary. That evening, Rebecca sat in her cozy townhouse garden, reading emails from women across the country who'd reached out after hearing her story. Some were just beginning to recognize the signs of abuse in their own relationships. Others were in the middle of escaping. Many were rebuilding their lives and wanted to share their victories. One email particularly moved her. "Dear Mrs. Hayes, I saw your interview on CNN last month. I've been married for 15 years to a man who controls every aspect of my life. Your story gave me the courage to call a lawyer. Tomorrow I'm filing for divorce. Thank you for showing me that it's possible to start over at 45. You saved my life without even knowing it." Rebecca wiped away tears as she typed her response, offering encouragement and practical resources. Each woman who found the courage to leave felt like a victory against the mentality that had once controlled Rebecca's own life. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Dinner tomorrow. I want to hear about your first month back in the classroom." Rebecca smiled as she responded affirmatively. Her friendship with Patricia had deepened through the trial and its aftermath. Having someone who'd known her before Marcus, who remembered the confident young woman she'd been, helped Rebecca reconnect with parts of herself she'd forgotten existed. As the sun set over her garden, Rebecca reflected on the extraordinary year that had transformed her from victim to survivor to advocate. The woman who'd been afraid to check her own bank accounts was gone, replaced by someone who testified in federal court, started a foundation, and inspired other women to reclaim their lives. The path had been painful: divorce, criminal trials, public scrutiny, and the complete reconstruction of her identity. But sitting in her own garden, in a house she'd chosen, planning a future she controlled, Rebecca knew every difficult moment had been worth it. Her phone rang. Ashley's name appeared on the screen. "Rebecca, I hope I'm not calling too late." Emma just said her first word. "What did she say?" "Mama." She looked right at me and said, "Mama?" Rebecca smiled, thinking about Ashley's journey from Marcus's victim to independent mother. "That's beautiful. Ashley, how are you doing?" "Good. Really good. The accounting program is going well, and Emma's daycare is wonderful." "Rebecca, I never thanked you properly for not hating me, for helping me when you had every reason to want revenge." "Ashley, we both survived the same predator. That makes us allies, not enemies." After hanging up, Rebecca sat quietly in her garden, listening to the evening sounds of her neighborhood. Somewhere in a federal prison, Marcus was probably planning appeals and plotting his eventual return to power. But his plotting couldn't touch her anymore. She'd built a life he could never infiltrate, never control, never destroy. The transformation that had begun with the discovery of hidden bank statements was complete. Rebecca Hayes' teacher, advocate, survivor was finally fully herself. 1 year after Marcus's sentencing, Rebecca stood before a packed auditorium at Harvard Law School, preparing to deliver the keynote address for the annual conference on domestic violence and financial abuse. The invitation had surprised her. She wasn't a lawyer or an academic, just a woman who'd survived and was determined to help others do the same. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying clearly to the back of the room. 2 years ago, I was a woman who needed permission to spend $50 from my own bank account. Today, I'm here to tell you that financial independence isn't just about money. It's about dignity, safety, and the fundamental right to control your own life. The audience was silent, attentive. Rebecca could see faces that ranged from young law students to seasoned prosecutors, all listening to her story with the intensity of people who understood its importance. "When I discovered that my millionaire ex-husband had stolen over $8 million from our marriage and his company, I thought I was dealing with a simple case of greed. I didn't understand that financial abuse is often the foundation for other forms of domestic violence. I didn't know that economic control is one of the primary reasons women stay in dangerous relationships." Rebecca had become a sought-after speaker in the months since the trial ended. Her story resonated because it challenged stereotypes about domestic violence victims. She'd been educated, middle class, married to a successful man, demographics that were supposed to protect against abuse. The myth that abuse only happens to poor women or uneducated women is not just wrong, it's dangerous. Abusers are found in every socioeconomic class, every profession, every community. They're CEOs and teachers, doctors and mechanics, politicians and pastors. What they have in common isn't their job or their income, it's their need to control. After her speech, Rebecca was approached by Dr. Jennifer Walsh from the law school's domestic violence clinic. "Mrs. Hayes, we've been following your advocacy work. Would you consider developing a curriculum about financial abuse for our clinic students? Too many lawyers don't understand the economic dimensions of domestic violence." "Edu." Rebecca accepted immediately. Teaching had always been her calling, and this felt like the perfect synthesis of her experience and her passion for education. Later that afternoon, Rebecca drove to her favorite coffee shop in Cambridge, where she'd agreed to meet someone special. Caroline Mitchell was a 50-year-old woman who'd reached out through the Rebecca Hayes Foundation website. Her story was heartbreakingly familiar: 25 years of marriage to a controlling husband, systematic isolation from friends and family, and financial abuse that made leaving seem impossible. "Mrs. Hayes, I can't thank you enough for agreeing to meet with me," Caroline said, her hands shaking as she lifted her coffee cup. "Please call me Rebecca, and you don't need to thank me. I remember exactly how you're feeling right now. I feel so stupid. How did I let this happen? How did I become so powerless in my own life?" Rebecca reached across the table and covered Caroline's hand with her own. "You're not stupid, or Caroline. You're dealing with a systematic campaign of psychological manipulation designed to make you doubt your own perceptions. The fact that you're here, that you're questioning the situation, proves you're not powerless." They talked for 2 hours. Rebecca shared practical advice about documenting financial abuse, finding legal representation, and building a support network. More importantly, she offered something Caroline desperately needed: hope that escape was possible and that life after abuse could be better than anything she'd imagined. Rebecca, do you ever regret the fight, the publicity, the trial, all of it? Rebecca considered the question seriously. Caroline, I regret staying silent for so long. I regret believing Marcus's version of who I was supposed to be. But fighting back, exposing his crimes, using my experience to help other women? Never. That fight gave me back my life. That evening, Rebecca returned to her townhouse to find a package waiting on her doorstep. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small frame photograph. Dear Mrs. Hayes, the letter began. You don't know me, but I heard you speak in Chicago last month. I've been married to an abusive man for 12 years, and I finally found the courage to leave last week. I'm writing from my sister's house in Denver, where my children and I are safe for the first time in years. The enclosed photo is of my daughter Emma, age 8, and my son James, age 10, on their first day at their new school. I wanted you to see what freedom looks like. Thank you for showing me it was possible. Rebecca wiped away tears as she studied the photograph. Two children with bright smiles and hopeful eyes, standing in front of a school that represented new beginnings and new possibilities. Her phone rang. Patricia's name appeared on the screen. Honey child, how was Harvard? Powerful, overwhelming, hopeful? Patricia, I think I'm finally understanding what I'm supposed to do with the rest of my life, which is teach, not just in a classroom, but everywhere. Courtrooms, conferences, shelters, anywhere women need to hear that they're not alone and that they deserve better. Rebecca, you've become quite the advocate. Your mama would be so proud. Rebecca smiled, thinking about her mother, who died 5 years earlier. I think she would. You know what's strange? Patricia, I feel more like myself now than I have in decades. It's as if surviving Marcus's abuse stripped away everything that wasn't authentically me. Trauma can do that, Patricia said in her therapist's voice. Sometimes we have to lose everything we thought we were to discover who we really are. After hanging up, Rebecca walked through her small house, taking inventory of her new life. The living room held books she'd chosen, art she'd selected, furniture that reflected her taste rather than Marcus's demands for expensive perfection. The kitchen smelled like the lavender tea she preferred over coffee. Her bedroom was decorated in soft blues and greens that made her feel peaceful. Every choice, from the paint colors to the grocery shopping, was hers to make. At 53, she was learning to trust her own preferences after decades of deferring to someone else's wishes. Her laptop sat open on the kitchen table, displaying the draft of an article she was writing for Harvard Law Review about the intersection of financial abuse and domestic violence. The invitation to publish in such a prestigious journal still amazed her. 2 years ago, she'd been a woman whose opinions were dismissed by her own husband. Now, legal scholars were asking for her insights. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Through the peephole, she saw Ashley standing on the porch, holding Emma, who was now a chubby, happy toddler. Ashley, what a lovely surprise. I hope we're not intruding. Emma and I were in the neighborhood visiting the pediatrician, and I wanted to show you something. Ashley pulled an envelope from her diaper bag. I got my accounting degree. Rebecca, I graduated summa cum laude. Rebecca hugged her friend, careful not to squeeze the baby. Ashley, that's wonderful. How does it feel? Terrifying and amazing? I start work at a nonprofit next month, helping low-income families with tax preparation and financial planning. The irony isn't lost on me. They sat in Rebecca's living room while Emma played with toys Rebecca kept for visiting children. Watching Ashley with her daughter, Rebecca marveled at the transformation. The frightened young woman who testified against Marcus had become a confident mother and professional. Rebecca, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever think about dating again, about finding someone new? Rebecca considered the question. Several men had asked her out since the divorced fellow teachers, men she'd met through her advocacy work. Even a prosecutor from Marcus's case. She'd politely declined all of them. Honestly, Ashley, I'm not sure I want to share my life with anyone right now. I'm still learning how to be alone without being lonely. For the first time in my adult life, I make every decision based on what I want, what I need, what makes me happy. It's intoxicating. But don't you get lonely? Rebecca thought about her days teaching passionate students, working with abuse survivors, writing articles, speaking at conferences, gardening, reading books Marcus would have dismissed as frivolous. I have a rich, full life surrounded by people I care about. I'm not opposed to love, but I'm no longer desperate for it. That's made all the difference. As Ashley prepared to leave, she turned back to Rebecca with a serious expression. Rebecca, I need you to know something. Watching you transform from victim to survivor to advocate, it saved my life. Not just from Marcus, but from the mindset that told me I needed a man to validate my worth. You showed me what female strength looks like. After Ashley left, Rebecca returned to her article, but found herself distracted by the weight of that compliment. She'd never thought of herself as particularly strong or brave. The decisions she'd made leaving Marcus, testifying against him, rebuilding her life had felt like survival. Not heroism, but maybe that was what strength really was. Not the absence of fear, but action despite fear. Not perfection, but the willingness to keep trying. Not the elimination of vulnerability, but the courage to be authentic anyway. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mrs. Hayes, I heard your Harvard speech online. I'm a 67-year-old woman who's been married for 45 years to a man who controls every aspect of my life. Is it too late for me? Is 67 too old to start over? Rebecca's heart ached for this woman, trapped for nearly 5 decades in a controlling marriage. She typed back immediately, it's never too late to reclaim your life. I'm 53 and just getting started. Would you like to talk? The conversation that followed lasted 2 hours. Rebecca listened to a story that was both unique and universal: decades of psychological manipulation, financial control, and gradual erosion of self-worth. But underneath the pain, Rebecca heard something else: determination. By the end of the call, Eleanor Martinez had committed to contacting a lawyer, opening her own bank account, and reaching out to adult children she'd been isolated from for years. Rebecca, Eleanor said as they concluded, I thought my life was over. You've shown me it might just be beginning. After hanging up, Rebecca sat in her garden as twilight settled over the neighborhood. The conversation with Eleanor had reminded her of something important. Her story wasn't just about surviving Marcus's abuse. It was about discovering that transformation was possible at any age, under any circumstances. The woman who had discovered those hidden bank statements 2 years ago had been convinced her life was ending. Instead, it had been the beginning of everything she was meant to become. Rebecca looked up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky and smiled. Tomorrow she would teach her students about economic independence. Tomorrow she would counsel another abuse survivor. Tomorrow she would continue writing articles that might help change laws and save lives. Tomorrow she would wake up as Rebecca Hayes, teacher, advocate, survivor, and woman, finally, fully free. The sound of her phone ringing interrupted her thoughts. The caller ID showed a number she recognized from the domestic violence shelter. Rebecca Hayes Foundation. This is Rebecca. Mrs. Hayes, this is Maria from the shelter. I'm sorry to call so late, but we have a woman here who specifically asked for you. She says she heard your story and drove 3 hours to get here. She has 2 young children with her, and she's terrified but determined to start over. Rebecca was already reaching for her car keys. Tell her I'm on my way. Tell her she's safe now, and that her new life starts tonight. As she drove through the quiet streets toward the shelter, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Marcus's betrayal had destroyed the life she thought she wanted, but it had given her the life she was meant to live. She was no longer someone's wife, someone's victim, someone's disappointment. She was Rebecca Hayes, a woman who had reclaimed her name, her voice, and her power to change the world one survivor at a time. The transformation that began with the sound of breaking glass had led to this: a life of purpose, authenticity, and hope. Sometimes the best chapters really do begin when you think the story's over.